Here today I have 6 pieces of new work that I've made in my studio in Pittsburgh. When I'm there, I'm assembling work, but I bring it from a number of sources. So I'm slumping glass at the Glass Center in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, at my own studio to make the work that I have here. I make drops at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, and that's one of my loves. Ron and I co-founded that center in 2001. We started developing it in 1995, and from there we grew this idea of a glass center where artists come from all mediums and think in glass. I really talked about building resources for artists. That was one of my most important aims. I taught at Carnegie Mellon in the 80s and 90s, the university there, and ran the glass program there. But once my students graduated, they had nowhere to really work. So our aim was to build a place that not only grew the artists in Pittsburgh, but attracted Pittsburgh from other places. So even at the moment we opened, I had even forgotten that aim, and I turned to someone next to me and said, "So where do you come from in Pittsburgh?" And they said, "Kathleen, I'm not from Pittsburgh. I came here to be at the Glass Center." And that's what a public access glass center does for a city. It immediately attracts people, not 10 years later or 20 years later. It was at the moment that it opened, people were there. Ron and I had this vision that artists could come from other materials and think in glass. And that was one of the key things that we brought to that table. And it's still going on today, even though we've stepped back to do our own work. The artists are they come from all over, from many different disciplines, to think and work in glass. So we see in a lot of schools, they will spend maybe a month or 2 making a cup. And that's a wonderful thing if you want to work in a utilitarian format. But I really believe that the idea can lead your search for the technique and the material, or inventing a technique. The idea should lead that focus. So to me, that's really important, and I think that's why bringing in artists from other materials is so important, because they don't have that history of making the cup. So they don't have to worry about making the cup. They have to worry about how can they get this image in their mind on the wall or on the floor or on a pedestal. How can they figure it out? Or in the environment, how can they create that environment? And I think that is key to taking a material from craft to art, to the next level. It's the artist's intention. So the intention really has to come first. And a lot of people, when they first saw Ron's work, said, that's not glass, because they couldn't imagine glass not being clear. And I work with clear because I love the purity of that. That's wonderful. For me, the clarity is great, but in his work, that volume was so important to him. And I think it came from his long history in clay, in sculpture, in painting, and then arriving at glass later in his life. For me, the drop is so important, and it's just such a simple form that people who are, say, steeped in technique would say, it's too simple. And then I think of Joseph Beuys, or the wonderful paintings of Pat Steer that are just about the rain or the atmosphere. And I think, no, it's not too simple. It's just what I want. It's just the form I'm looking for. It's just that beautiful soft line that comes down that form, down my paintings, because I think of them a little as paintings. I'm using a brush to add acid etching to the background. So when I'm brushing, I'm thinking about breaking that glassy surface and then dropping a glassy drop on top of it that just lays on the surface. I feel a sound when I'm making them, when I'm composing the drops along that canvas. I feel a sound that comes out of the drops as I'm placing one next to the next, next to the next. And I listen for that feeling of dissonance sometimes, and sometimes a kind of a softness where the forms just lay together and they really work as a team in the canvas. So how did I get there? We simply pick a place where we know we can spend 3 days on the river, camping, cooking, and then just floating. And in that moment on the river, and it's the west branch of the Susquehanna, it's very wide and flat, and we were in the middle of the river, and all of a sudden I could see a storm coming toward me. And there was no way to get right or left. And as it came so quickly, we had to submit, and it came through me, away from me, and kept passing by as if it was a sheet of rain. And as that sheet disappeared, I realized the air felt different. Everything smelled different. The water felt different. The sky was different. And I put my hand in the water and just sort of said, what will my new work look like because of this? But it wasn't just the river. It was the women. It was the moment on the river, the being away, being at a primitive campsite, hearing stories from each other. And then I let it go because I had to start paddling. And 3 months later, I woke up out of one of those lucid dreams where I saw on the wall drops in a frame, but I didn't know what it was made of or how I was going to do it, but there were the drops. And I turned to Ron and said, I know what my new work is going to look like. And quickly did a drawing and then just put it aside. And from there, I had to figure out how do I make this? How do I make that? How do I describe the river? And that's when the bent glass came into the picture. And I began to research gunmetal patinas. And I'm using plum brown and blue-black patinas to paint the surface of the metal. And it was my idea of trying to create that surface and that below the water surface. Then what was the water? The water had to be something bent. It had to be moving. So the plate glass came into the picture. And I thought, okay, how do I make that? So I have to set up pins of steel and lay the glass over a set of pins that have a separator on top and allow the glass to just relax in the oven. Keep looking until I get just the bend I want and then shut the kiln down. Then I needed to figure out how that worked. And I knew that I had to acid etch that surface. I knew I needed to change it, mark it, let it be moving underneath the drops. And then from there, I began to think, there are places that I've gone to, horizons that I've been at, oceans where I've seen this kind of bright, glistening light. So how do I make that? And I thought of a mirror at first, putting a mirror behind and etching the mirror and getting that kind of reflective. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. So I began to look at stainless steel and sanding it, smoothing it, changing the background, almost allowing sometimes the steel to look like the spray that comes up from a huge waterfall, and sometimes just a softness that I put behind the drops. Because what I'm looking for is that beyond the drops, there's a reflection coming back out through the glass, and you're getting this wonderful sort of synergy between that flatness behind and the drops in front. And then it was, how do I really build that frame? So the frames at first were very rough. I finally found a wonderful plant out in Boswell, PA, and the guys were great to work with. And I went back about a year later to the president of the plant and said, I had such a great experience here. Someone here is the person that needs to help me make my metal forms. And he said, well, I'll think about it. And I didn't hear from him, and I went back 2 months later and I said, someone here can work with me. I know that because I feel it was good energy. He said, well, I got a guy, but I got to ask him. So he finally did, and I met Gino, a wonderful metal fabricator who's been working for over 40 years. When I brought my pieces in, Gino said, why aren't they made this way? And I said, because I was told it was impossible. And he said, nothing's impossible, which is actually something I always say to artists about creating work, is if you have an idea, nothing is impossible. And it was just so refreshing to hear that. And after that, we began a wonderful venture together where Gino creates the metal, and then I work with it and tool it, but he first creates the tracks. And then everything comes together at my studio and we build it. It is wonderful to have people in various parts of my landscape, even if I have to travel an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to them, who I have a very strong relationship with. It's very important to me. So the 4x4 piece behind us, Swimming in Winter, that to make a 4x4 sheet of glass bend, you have an enormous kiln, and it has to be a little larger than 4 foot by 4 foot on the inside. And my friend Jerry Wagner, he has a kiln at his studio. It's a ceramic kiln, and he said, I can make that kiln work. No one else could do that, only Jerry, because he has that kind of knowledge. So he took a ceramic kiln that's firing gas and has 3 zones and figured out how to make that zone in the center be the zone that I could change the dials and have it go up just to the slumping that I need. And I've been working with Jerry ever since. So that's really the part of what I do, is the discovery and being patient within that discovery. And I think that's something that most people, if you don't have the answer, you just drop it. I don't drop it. I never drop anything. I keep working on it and asking people and looking and searching until I find the thing I need. Ron always talked about me being like an attention to detail, and I do that. I'm like the figure outer of whatever we can figure out, whatever is out there.